that spoke of this book. And I finally ran across it several months ago and bought it. And honestly, this is a tough read. It probably took me 4 months to read this book because I could read a little bit and then I'd have to go back and reread it, then read some more and reread it, and really have to think and scratch my head to try to understand this. But this book was written in 1825 by William Rawle. The title of the book is A View of the Constitution of the United States of America. In 1826, this book was reviewed by the National Review in Boston, and the guy gave it a glowing report. He said, if you want to understand the Constitution, this was a safe and intelligent source to guide you through the Constitution. This book was used as a textbook at the United States Military Institute in Virginia. Other authors have written about this book and recommended it for coursework and study work and stuff like that. This guy was considered an expert on the Constitution. He was born in 1757. He was educated in England, came back here not too long after the Revolutionary War had ended. Benjamin Franklin was one of the people that helped him get back over here. Benjamin Franklin and George Washington both were personal friends of this man. They were friends with each other. This man was an abolitionist. He joined an abolitionist party in Maryland and served there and did so well that he later became president of this abolitionist society in there. I think it was an abolitionist society in Maryland or something like that. But he received high accolades for this book, for who he was. He's a Northerner. He's a Yankee. He's an abolitionist. Let's see what he says about the Constitution. He says a lot. I don't want to read all of these to you because it just takes too long to read all this to you. But the principle of representation, although certainly the wisest and best, is not essential to the being of a republic, but to continue a member of the Union, it must be preserved, and therefore the guarantee must be so construed. It depends on the state itself to retain or abolish the principles of representation, because it depends on itself whether it will continue a member of the Union. In other words, he's saying right here that it's up to the states whether they remain a member of the Union or not. And he says these things many times over. If the majority of the people of a state deliberately and peaceably resolve to relinquish the Republican form of government, they cease to be members of the Union. If a faction and an inferior number make such an effort and endeavor to enforce it by violence, the case provided for will have arisen, and the Union is bound to employ its powers to prevent it, because the Union is tasked with ensuring that each state has a Republican form of government. And this is the only time the government can get into states' affairs is if the state asks the federal government to come in and help with the problem. In the instance of foreign invasion, the duty of immediate and unsolicited protection is obvious, but the generic term invasion, which used without any qualification, may require broader construction. If among the improbable events of future times which will see a state forgetful of its obligation to refer its contributions with another state, controversies to another state with its the judicial power of the Union endeavored by force to redress its real or imaginary wrongs and actually invade the other state, which shall perceive a case in which the supreme power of the Union may justly interfere, perhaps we may say it is bound to do so. So here it's saying that one state can invade another state. So if some people who mistakenly want to call this war our ancestors were involved in, a war between the states, and I've often said that's not right, because Illinois was not at war against South Carolina. Indiana was not at war with North Carolina. Ohio was not at war with Virginia. It was the Union Army, the federal government, that invaded the separate and sovereign nation, Confederate States of America. The secession of a state from the Union depends on the will of the people of such state. The people alone, as we have already seen, hold the power to alter their constitution. The Constitution of the United States is, to a certain extent, incorporated into the Constitution of several states by the act of the people. The state legislatures have only to perform certain organic operations in respect to it. To withdraw from the Union comes not within the general scope of their delegated authority. There must be an express provision to that effect inserted in state constitutions. This is not at present the case with any of them, but it actually was, because two of them already had it, and several others had implied it. But in any manner by which the secession is to take place, nothing is more certain than the act should be deliberate, clear, and unequivocal. The perspicuity and solemnity of the original obligation require correspondent qualities in its dissolution. The powers of the general government cannot be defeated or impaired by an ambiguous or implied secession on the part of the state, although secession may perhaps be conditional. The people of the state may have some reason to complain in respect to acts of the general government. They may, in such cases, invest some of their own officers with the power of negotiation, and may declare an absolute secession in the case of their failure. There are several times in here that this man refers to secession, and every time he clarifies the states, and by that the people of those states, have that power and authority to resume their sovereignty at any time they so choose. And as stated in the accession documents of New York and Rhode Island, it can be as little as to affect their own happiness. It doesn't have to be any big stuff. When you read the secession documents of the southern states, quite often people say, well, yeah, they all refer to slavery. Well, each and every one of those secession documents, if you read them from a legalistic point of view, you see that they're making a very strong and direct and correct argument of the right to secede, and based on that right, they are seceding due to the failure of the other states in the Union, in the northern states, to uphold their constitutional duties. They were trying to call for immediate abolition of slavery in this country. The government wasn't. The abolition societies were. People like that. There was no national law being debated to end slavery in this country. The abolitionists were calling for immediate and total freedom of all slaves, which, you know, I would have probably been an abolitionist. I don't agree in slavery. I don't. I think it's wrong. But that wasn't any way to end it. For one thing, slaves were property. All the big plantation owners in the South and in the northern states with plantations and stuff, they had property. And they would, just like a lot of farmers do today, they go to the bank and borrow money to get their operating income to buy whatever they need to do whatever they need to do. And they put up their farms as collateral. And it might be some machinery and other equipment and stuff on the farm that they own. Their possessions and stuff are used for collateral to secure that loan. Well, slaves were also considered property. They were used as collateral to secure loans from the northern banks. So if the southerners who owned slaves, or even the people in the north who owned slaves, who had mortgaged those slaves along with other property to get a loan from the banks, just suddenly decided, okay, we're going to free all the slaves. And they freed all the slaves. Is the bank going to allow them to do that? You can't dispose of that property. It's mortgaged property. northern banks held mortgages on those slaves, so they really weren't my slave or his slave or your slave. The northern banks more or less owned them because they were collateral for a loan. So how do you just throw your collateral to the side there and tell the bank, nah, your collateral's gone, nothing I can do about it, and I'm defaulting on the loan, you have nothing that you can repossess. I gave them all away, gave them all their freedom. So if you want them, they're out there, here are their names, go round them up. So that didn't happen. So they were really in a position they couldn't free all the slaves, but they could do gradual emancipation, which is what all the other countries did. The war wasn't about slavery. There was no movement to end slavery. Lincoln violated the Constitution in many ways during that war. Even starting that war, he violated the armistice we had with the Buchanan administration. So don't let anybody tell you your ancestor committed treason, because your ancestor was a citizen of a different country. He didn't commit treason or any acts of war as a citizen of that country. We had already left that country. We're no longer citizens of that country when that country sent armed troops in, and Lincoln told Governor Pickens of Florida they were going to resupply Fort Sumter peaceably if possible, by force if necessary, and there were armed troops aboard the ships. So they came out here with the intention of doing something, and if it meant killing people in the process, they were willing to kill people in the process. That's an act of aggression. If I approach you with a knife in my hand and tell you I'm about to cut you, and you pull your gun out and shoot me, who's the aggressor, me or you? So we were approached by a menacing authority, armed and ready to kill if necessary to accomplish what they set out to do. So we struck a defensive blow and fired first. That's what started the war. Lincoln forced that war by doing that. He knew it would force a war. There were papers that were found afterwards that he was in communication with the commander down there. They knew they were starting a war. And after everything happened like they knew it would, Lincoln and this guy corresponded back and forth, so it looks like things worked out just as we knew they would. So that was a war for power, for glory, to subjugate the Constitution, and not for anything good at all. It wasn't about slavery. There was no treason. Our ancestors fired against the foreign government that invaded their homelands. Thanks, Chad.
Okay, now I'd like to hand it over to John Ellis and then his flag.